All right. Glad to have my friend Jesse Johnson here with us today. Jesse, good to see you, and glad things are going well for you and your ministry there.
Michael, it's a joy to be here, man. I'm thankful for you, and I had a great time talking with your staff and this morning. And man, what an encouraging group of guys. So thanks for having me over.
Yeah, of course. Always good to catch up with you. Just want to talk a little bit about preaching and ministry with you, and hear your insights on a few things. How long have you been at your current church?
I've been at Emmanuel Bible Church for just over 10 years. We're in the Washington D.C. area, and the Lord is just blessing it. It's a great ministry.
So talk to me a little bit. How has your preaching changed in those 10 years? Not necessarily like any major core beliefs that have changed, unless they have, but just in terms of your preaching, how you prepare, what you're thinking about, how you deliver, maybe even how you evaluate. Anything changed in your preaching over the course of the decade?
I was thinking about this recently. Yeah, as an answer. 10 years ago, my whole week was devoted to the sermon, and I had this rigid formula that I did, reading commentaries on this day and writing the sermon this day and going over with friends on this day, and wanted that thing put to bed by Friday evening. And that was my pattern for several years. And if I'm being honest, the last few years, I've totally gotten away from that. So I'm definitely thinking more big picture now. Like I'm thinking like months ahead in my preaching. I'm reading books for months away. And I'm working the same amount of time. It's just like I'm more forward thinking. And as far as the actual sermon goes the week of, it's a lot more, I'm able to draw from the well of things I've preached before and kind of bring it together. And I found my sermons, like I'm really now putting them together on Saturday afternoons, which is something I was told not to do when I was in seminary. But I found like I can spend less time on them, and I think they're getting better. It's a weird dynamic, and I assure you, it's not laziness. It's more like the Israelites in the wilderness. The manna didn't last through Saturday, and I just found that it's more fresh in my mind when I'm doing Saturday afternoon, and it's less stressful for me and for my family. I'm not rationing it down all week. I'm just really kind of bringing things to the surface that I have been reading and studying, even ago. So like I'm going through the Sermon on the Mount right now.
Okay.
And I've been reading some books on the Sermon on the Mount over the last several months to get kind of the big picture in shape. And now I'm doing verse at a time. Passage coming up on divorce. So I've been studying that really for months on, to make sure all my understanding of Jesus' teaching on divorce is in order. So I'm not wrestling through this the week of, but now it is the week of, and I can just start to put the pieces together and go from there.
That's good. If you were going to talk to a group of young preachers, young meaning they're new to preaching, what would you say are 2 or 3 things that they most need to be thinking about as they are preparing their sermons, as they're studying, as they're writing, as they're choosing what goes in, what goes out? What are 2 or 3 things that you would encourage young preachers, new preachers, to have on the forefront of their mind?
Yeah, number one thing is you have to have a passion for what is this passage, what is the main point of this passage, and what is it teaching you about God? So I think a lot of younger preachers or new seminary grads can get sidetracked on all the minutia of a passage. And minutia of a passage is important in as much as it supports the main point.
Right.
But you don't need, let me just illustrate this very, very, very briefly. A friend of mine was preaching on Malachi 2 just this past Sunday. And through the week, he was getting wrapped up in what is the covenant with Levi. Like I think it's Malachi 2 verse 4. He's getting so wrapped up in it, and he was starting to develop a message that's built around the covenant with Levi. And he's like, it's only in the Bible and a few other places. And on Saturday, I was like, dude, let's stop, time out. Let's not build a sermon around the covenant with Levi. Okay, what's the main point God is trying to communicate through this passage, and what does it teach you about God? And so he told me, like, yeah, he ditched the covenant with Levi. It is interesting, and he wants to learn more about it. But he made a very good sermon. It was an exceptional sermon yesterday on that passage that didn't get bogged down in the minutiae of it. So that's the main challenge I would tell younger guys is figure out the main point of the passage and what it teaches you about God and drill down there. And then the second thing I would say is don't don't dilute your sermons with lots of illustrations, but find one or two key illustrations that really are subservient to your main point. So that when sometimes people will walk away from a sermon and they'll remember the illustration.
Right.
And it's so sad when that illustration is like a throwaway illustration or cheesy intro or something like that. It doesn't actually teach the main point. But man, if you've got a good illustration that serves the main point, you get the sermon around that, and people walk away with the main point, what it teaches about God, and then it's illustrated very, very well for them. So those are the two things: find the main point and what it teaches you about God, and then use one or two good illustrations rather than littering cheesy illustrations all over the place.
That's good. Let me take a minute and kind of set up this next question I want to get your thoughts on. One of the things I really appreciate about you, your ministry, and even just in talking to you as a friend through the last couple of years, is you're a very joyful person. I think you preach in a joyful way. I think in one-on-one conversation, you communicate in a winsome, joyful way. I've seen you preach a number of sermons online. I've seen you teach on conversations like this over computer. I've had a chance to talk theology with you and hear you talk theology, but you do it in such a joyful way. So first of all, I appreciate that about you. I think our world needs more winsome, smart guys doing theology. So I really appreciate that about you. Having said that, it may be easy for somebody to think that ministry is just always easy, or preaching is always easy, or pastoring a church is always easy. I assume you struggle, as any human would, with discouragement or frustration. I never see you take that out with the congregation when you preach. You love your people. It's clear that you are shepherding them faithfully as you preach the word. But behind the scenes, with personal life or ministry life, when discouragement comes, how do you combat that? How do you respond to that? And maybe even a word about preaching through discouraging seasons, if that's anything that may resonate with you.
Yeah. So the key in my own life has been to have friends that are, I have friends that are in the ministry, and I have friends that are out of the ministry, and having both of those categories of friends has been such a blessing to me. I've got guys, some of my closest friends are on staff at church with me, and it sounds cheesy, but we can do life together. We go to lunch together. We read the Bible together. We pray together, and we can encourage each other. So having those kind of friendships is so helpful. I'm blessed at a multi-staff church. I know a lot of guys are not at a multi-staff church, but you can maintain those friendships with guys that aren't even in your area. Friends that are around the country, around the world from seminary that you can text with and pray with. I have friends in a different state that I know I can call him and we will pray together on the phone. And that's just helpful for me. And my relationship with my family, we have just a very, very good relationship, and we can go do stuff. If I'm going through a discouraging thing at church or whatever, my family understands, and we can pile in the car and we can go somewhere. We can drive 3 hours to the beach, or we can go up to the Shenandoah Mountains and go for a hike. And I just like being with my family, and they encourage me, and we have a very good relationship in that sense. So I think those are the two ways: friends and then family. And the good thing with both of those is sometimes you might be discouraged about something in your family,
right,
and you can go to your friends. And sometimes you might be discouraged about something with your friends, and you can go to your wife. The Lord has guarded me from being in a situation where both of those spheres are discouraging at the same time.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, I've been blessed by having happiness in one or those two areas. Yeah. The Lord's been good to me in that way.
I'm sure you've had a specific Sunday where you have to preach, and it's been a hard week. You're there to teach the word, and yet maybe you've walked with somebody through a particular really hard trial, or maybe someone you've invested in has walked away from the faith. Talk about how do you shepherd God's people joyfully, even while your own heart is hurting and grieving, maybe over the sin of people you're trying to pastor.
Yeah, I mean, I can think of some very particular examples. and Sundays where that's happened. I remind myself, first of all, the Lord doesn't change. So if I'm discouraged today, that's not because the Lord is discouraging today.
Right.
I remind myself that, I was super encouraged last week, and the Lord was encouraged last week. So, the clouds blocking the sun are not the fault of the sun. The sun is still there. And so I try to have a joy in preaching, remembering the sun is behind the clouds. Also, I really do try to meet new people at church on a Sunday morning. Like, here's a visitor, or so-and-so brought a friend. And then in my mind or in my heart, I'm kind of preaching to that person. So that's like detaching what's happening in the world. And there's a non-believer there. There's this, and I'm just filling out a story in my mind. Like, I met this guy. He says, a friend of mine invited me to church. Well, I don't know the details behind that. I might not even know the friend behind that, but I'm getting up behind the pulpit and thinking, like, this dude's friend has been praying for him for years. He's probably a coworker from work or a neighbor from the neighborhood. And he finally got this like slacker villain to church. And the guy's there and he's going to listen to me for 40 minutes. So kind of whatever I'm going through in my life, let me pause that and just serve the Lord in this particular way. And that energizes me.
That's good. That's good. Let me ask you one last question. What's something you would say that you wish church members knew about pastors, or that you wish church members understood better about pastoring God's people? Just as a pastor, been doing it for a while, if you could just instantly infuse in your church members and all church members this knowledge or background about pastoring or being a pastor, what would it be?
That I love them. That's what I want them to know, that I love them. And my way of showing that is bringing the word to them and to hope the Lord works in their lives through that. That's my expression of love. Not everybody receives it that way, but that's what's meant by it. So there's been lots of times where people have told me, like, did I do something to offend you because you didn't talk to me when I talked to you in the hallway, or asked you a question, you never responded, kind of thing. And like, honestly, I don't even remember those conversations. Like, somebody says that and I actually don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
I was distracted. Who knows what's going on in my mind? But I would just want people to know that I really do love them and care for them. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Right.
This is not a job for me. Like, I love people. And, you mentioned that I come across as joyful, and I think there's a sense in that's true, but also there's a sense in which a lot of people don't know me at church. And so they can see my preaching, but I don't have conversations with them all the time in the hallway. And I would just want them to know that I do love them and care for them, even if I don't get to talk to them or see them much.
Yeah. That's so helpful, Jesse, because I think a lot of pastors would answer that question with, I wish my church knew how many hours I worked. I wish my church knew, how much I do behind the scenes. I wish my church knew, how much I don't get paid for. I think a lot of guys would answer with that kind of a mentality. And I think it's so helpful to hear you say that you wish your people knew how much you loved them and cared about them. That's a great reminder for those of us who preach, that it's got to be true of us. We've got to really love our people for us to, with integrity, wish they knew how much we loved them. So I think that's a super helpful word. Yeah.
I mean, do you have time? 1 minute?
Of course.
Okay. So I remember in when I was associate pastor at Grace Church, I was taking a bunch of kids to a Dodgers game, and from the church, we were meeting at church to go to the LA Dodgers game, and some guy shows up a little bit late from our ministry, and he's like covered in sawdust and oil, and he's a mess. And he was a landscaper, and he tells us that he was cutting down a tree, and it fell and hit power lines, and they fell into the back of the wood chipper, and it caught on fire, and the engine blew and covered him with oil and sawdust. And the fire department came and had to put out the fire in the wood chipper. And could he use the shower before we went to the Dodger game? And so I sent him up to Pastor MacArthur's shower. That'll remain here. That's that scene. The Lord seared that in my memory. I mean, that is a guy who's working. That guy gets to go to a Dodgers game. I'm coordinating Dodgers games, and I don't want to trivialize pastoral ministry. Like, I'm doing hospital marriage counseling, and there are emotionally draining moments of pastoral ministry.
Sure.
But that's the nature of what the Lord has called us to. There are people in our congregation that are pulling 70-hour weeks and having injuries explode in their faces.
Right.
And even in the white collar world, there's guys that are negotiating massive deals, or in the political world that have real lives are at stake in their decisions, and it is draining. It's not confined to pastoral ministry,
right.
you know.
That's so true. That's so true. You know, I pray for you every Sunday, and pray for your church, and I love seeing what you're doing, and I think you're such a good example to so many people how to be a serious thinker, how to have careful precision in theology and preaching, but do it in a way that is hopeful and joyful and loves people, and obvious that you care about your people. And I love and appreciate that about you. You serve as a great example to me and to so many, how you blend theological seriousness together with shepherding love and compassion. And I really appreciate about your ministry, and I'm thankful for your friendship and for what you've shared with us here today.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Thanks for the joy you bring and the encouragement you are to me, brother. I appreciate it.
All right. Blessings to you, friend. Thank you.